Hi everyone, welcome to this week's discussion about Somali art. We have a great selection of panelists all across, mainly from the UK, but also from some different countries. So we're gonna get straight into it. We're kind of running late. I'm gonna ask A.rahman to give us a bit of an introduction about himself and what he does. A.rahman. Also, can I just ask that all panelists make sure that they mute themselves if you're not speaking? Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. Hello, everyone. My name is A.rahman Yusuf. I am a freelance photographer based in Mogadishu, Somalia. I do street photography, portraiture, and creative projects. I usually work with private institutions, government agencies, and different clients for different projects. My latest project, creative project, was COVID-19 response, Somalia's COVID-19 response, and it's published on Behance and my Instagram. And thank you, Amina, for inviting me. I am glad I'm here. This is a great initiative.
Thank you. Could you just elaborate more about the work that you do, that you've done?
I am a freelance photographer, so I do creative projects on social issues that's happening. I also do freelance work for private institutions, clients, and the UN. So I deal with different clients for different projects.
How did you get into photography?
It was a hobby to begin with. I've been freelancing now for over 8 years.
Yeah.
I think I started officially in 2012. And yeah.
That's great. Thank you, A.rahman. Next, we're going to go on to Nisha. A.rahman, if you can just make sure you mute yourself, please. Thank you.
Hey, my name's Nisha. I'm from Scotland. I'm a photographer and a journalist. The reason that I'm in this group, I guess, is a few years ago, I did a collaborative art project with some of my Somali friends in London. My friend Mohammed, he was working for the British Library, helping to put together the Somali collection and preserve it. And he'd been asked to do like a community engagement group. And I don't know if he was telling me about this Somali historian called Maya, and she was talking about how to preserve Somali art and archaeology when things are unstable. And she said one of the most important things was that Somali people connect to the work and they see themselves reflected in it. If you don't see yourself reflected, you don't have an incentive to preserve it. So one of the biggest problems with the Somali collection at the British Library was it's mostly colonial photography or colonial sources, and there's very few Somali voices in the Somali collection itself. So we had this idea that maybe we could put a call out to Somali artists in London and historians and poets so that they could put forward their own expression, and we could put that into some sort of book or journal and put that into the Somali collection in the library, so that in the future, if some people access it, they have a more diverse, I guess, idea, not just things that are made by the colonialists who went to Somalia. So that was the idea behind it. And it was really a learning curve for me. I didn't know much about Somalia before. They don't teach you much about it at school. I didn't know much about the politics or the history or the art. And it was really amazing learning about the culture through this project, and especially like the incredible amount of poetry and proverbs and the oral history. And it was a really great experience for me, but I think also it was a good precedent for the British Library to set to try and, you know, get some more people involved who are actually from the cultures that they are preserving their culture, if that makes sense. So I'd be happy to share with you some of the work that Somali artists made and poets, and you know, I would think that it could be something that more people could contribute to in the future, if that makes sense. yeah, I'm gonna shut up now. But...
That was perfect. Thank you. Next, we're gonna go on to Najoum. Najoum, you just have to make sure you unmute yourself. You're still muted. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Nice to meet you guys. My name is Najoum Ahmed Hashi, nicknamed by Najoum. I'm an artist, freelance artist who do art, different types of arts. I do paintings, I do animations, I do illustrations, digital illustrations. I do decorative artworks. I work with a lot of NGOs, internationally and locally. So that's what I do. I live in Mogadishu, Somalia, where I based now. But I grew up in Hargeisa, Somaliland. So that's what I do. Nice to meet you guys.
Thank you, Najoum. How long have you been doing it and how did you get into it?
Actually, I've been doing this, I think, all my life, as I remember. I used to do artworks, paintings, drawings, whatever, since even when I was at school, when I was young. I started doing art when I was 7 years. And my daddy used to do a lot of art, so he used to teach me some, and I used to take some advantage of learning from him. And as I can remember, I used to do art even at the school, at the university, and everything. Now it's like before 2 years, I really decided to change this into a career where I can benefit from myself and for everybody else. So for now, I'm a full-time job artist.
Thank you, Najoum. That was amazing. Next, we're going to go on to Salma. Najoum, if you can just make sure that you mute yourself as well. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Salma Ibrahim. I was invited to take part in this panel by a friend of mine called Mohammed, and so I'm a writer. I'm currently writing a novel, so I'm in the final stages of getting my novel submitted to agents. I won the London Writers' Award and I was part of the 2019 cohort, which meant that we were on a 9-month programme to produce a piece of work. Mine was a novel. I'm also freelance communications and marketing manager for mostly NGOs, working in the refugee and migration space. And I also founded an organisation called Literary Natives, and we basically bring together writers at all stages of the writing journey, from those who are just starting out to those who've been published, and we put together workshops and panels and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Salma. Just for those that are listening, how did you get into becoming a novelist?
I've always been quite passionate about writing, I guess, but it started properly, I would say, towards the end of university. So I did English literature at university, and I guess, you know, having spent that time reading a lot about post-colonial literature and global literature, and just being really interested in how, you know, different writers kind of use the medium of the novel to address different current societal issues and themes, I decided to kind of use my dissertation as an opportunity to write a short story, and I was just encouraged to kind of continue, and I've always wanted to write something, having been really into reading from a very young age. So I thought I would just kind of pursue that, and I've been doing that alongside working for a few years now, so yeah.
Will your novel be translated into any other language, or will it just mainly be in English?
Well, I hope definitely to have it in the Somali language, that's for sure. That's something I really want to ensure that happens, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Salma. Next, we're going to move on to Yasin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yasin. I'm a filmmaker. I'm based in London. I started the journey of getting into filmmaking about 8 years ago with sort of a typical wedding videography, short stories, the narrative stuff. And about a year ago, I opened my own production company. Lately, I've been working a lot with businesses to create small adverts to showcase the value that they have. And more so, I've been getting into the narrative stuff, short films and and things like that. And the common denominator between all of us seems to be Muhammad, which is also a friend of mine who's done some great acting work in the past, I can say, on some short films. But yeah.
So for Yasin, for those that are listening, how would you encourage those that are interested in getting into the type of work that you do? What advice would you give them?
I think lately it's been getting easier and easier. The barriers to entry are sort of lower. Everyone can pick up a camera. Everyone can sort of express themselves in the way that they'd like. So I don't think it's as elitist as it once was. But I think filmmaking is very accessible. So if you do want to get into it, you know, have a point of view, have something that you would like to say, and pick up a camera and tell that story.
Thank you, Yasin. Next, we're going to go on to Zahra.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Zahra Haji. I am a poet based in Mogadishu, Somalia. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. I've been in Mogadishu for the past 5 years. So in Mogadishu, I'm now the CEO of the SomaliStoryTellers. SomaliStoryTellers is a digital storytelling company, and it's based in Mogadishu. But though we have team members from all over Somalia in different regions. So what we do is basically we share the stories that are not heard of in our communities. We highlight issues and we try to find solutions for those issues. And the way we do this is through digital storytelling. We also promote peace and creativity on our platform and show you the side of Somalia that you mainly do not see on TV, because normally everybody knows now when you see Somalia on the media or on TV, it's always the negative things that get to the people, where there is like so many other things that people can talk about and share, but somehow it's only the negative things that stay on TV. So that's about it about me. Other than that, I really enjoy poetry, and that's a huge part of my life.
Thank you, Sarah. That was perfect. Next, we're just going to go on, and I'm just going to ask a few questions. The questions will be open to anyone to answer, but if no one steps forward, I will direct it to just someone. So the first question I want to ask is, what does Somali art mean to you?
I'll go first.
Thank you, A.rahman.
I think to me, Somali art means culture, music, and poetry. It's been said somewhere, I think I've read it somewhere, that Somalia is the land of poets, or it used to be. And we have a rich history.
You don't think Somalia or Somalis are still the land of poets?
I think Zahra should answer that question. She's a poet.
We're still the nation of poets. Go on.
We have a rich history of creativity and art. Unfortunately, that history was shadowed by 30 years of unrest. We used to tell stories and paint feelings. Mogadishu used to be a hub for culture and art. And I still believe we can be the hub again if we take the narrative and tell our own stories instead of letting the media just tell negative stories about the country.
So how would you encourage people that are listening today to take back the narrative?
I think we should create and just tell our own stories. I think we should show the world that we have a lot to offer than war and famine. So if we tell our own stories and be creative, we can do it.
Okay, thank you, A.rahman. Zahra, I just want to go on to you from the comment that A.rahman said when he said, we used to be the nation of poets, and you changed it to we still are. Can you just elaborate on that?
I feel like we still are. There's a lot of young Somali poets, even though, you know, a lot of us have grown up in different areas, different countries, we still have the poetry DNA in our system, and we somehow changed it to another language, but it's still part of our culture. And I believe, like, you know, that's going to be something that's going to go on for the upcoming generations. It's something that's in your blood. You can't change it.
But do you feel like, for instance, mahmah, do you feel like our generation and the generation after it are gonna kind of like slowly by slowly, you know, we're gonna have less of those in our head and be using less of those? Because growing up, you grow up in your Somali family, in the environment you grow up. If you do something with your parents wants to, you know, enlighten you, they'll drop in a mahmah in that conversation. So do you feel like we will do that with our kids and our kids will do that with their kids, or do you feel like it's gonna water down?
I think though, being here in Mogadishu, Somalia, I do hear a lot of mama, different types of mama, and people do translate it. So I think that as far as mama goes, maybe the diaspora, the Somali diaspora in the diaspora kind of like are missing out on that, or maybe they won't be able to pass that on to their kids. But, you know, back here in Somalia, I feel like it's still very much alive. And it's like two different worlds. When you're on the other side, it's like you barely hear that. Only like the only time you'll hear it is from relatives or parents. But for us, like Somali diaspora, we don't know the mahmah that much to like kind of pick it up and kind of, you know, do that to our kids as well. But here is like very different, you know. You
so the youth back home are really just using it in the everyday language.
Sometimes, yeah, when they're referring to stuff, they do tend to use it and kind of explain what they mean by that. Because sometimes I get confused myself.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, which is actually about mahmah. So it is, what is your favorite Somali mahmah? Let me see if anyone knows any Somali mahmah.
I'll speak on that one. My favorite one is "So joksa laga wayo, so jifta laga hela."
So do you want to translate that and explain it to us?
Basically, I've heard that so many times, like, you know, when you do something wrong, or when you see your parents kind of like calling out somebody for their wrong actions, you know, after they've done something, and then it's like to kind of learn a lesson. You know, when you do something and your parents tell you don't do it, and then you end up doing it. And it's like, okay, so you didn't listen to me now. That's what you get, you know? So joksani ki lagawaya, so jifal gahela.
That's a good mahmah. I'm sure a lot of parents have said it a lot of times. Thank you, Zahra. Nisha, I wanted to ask you, as you've worked with Somali art, and I'm sure you've also done some, you know, amazing work with other art that comes from other countries and cultures, what stood out to you when it came to working with Somali art?
I guess even if it was painting or photography or poetry, there was always some like wisdom in it. I guess that's maybe related to the world of proverbs, but I think that's one thing that was quite universal actually, because everybody can learn from proverbs and they apply to so many different cultures in different ways. So I know this, that's would be my answer.
So when you first started working with Somali art, was it what you thought it was, or did you think it would be something different?
There was definitely a lot of surprises. I guess, you know, it's art in the large form in the sense that it was writing as well, photography, poetry, and some of the artworks that contributors presented were quite modern. This graphic designer, she made different designs that explained proverbs. So they would have an image that was like representative of the proverb. They were really smart, and I never thought of doing anything in that way, and it was very modern. And I can't remember what the proverb was in Somali, but I remember one of them, which is an expression for when you have like a bad stomach and it's like your stomach has feet or something like that. I don't know it in Somali, but yeah, I actually, when I looked at this question that you sent about the mahmah, I'm not gonna lie, I had to Google it. What that meant. But yeah, I actually did find one that when I looked at, I was reading some different proverbs, and one that really stuck out to me, I'm not going to read it in Somali or even attempt, but I'm going to read it in English.
Okay.
It said, one doesn't tell a man to go away, but one shows him something so he will go. I don't know if you know that, but I thought it was really smart and something that we could all use as a society, like think about how you get what you want. I don't know if that makes sense. And how actually, if you want people to come together or all be on the same page, it's better to do that without force, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Yasin or Salma or Najoum, this one is for you. Do you believe there's a huge stigma when discussing Somali art, and if so, why?
I don't think there's a stigma around the broader idea of discussing art. What I think is happening is there seems to be this tension between like the old and the new. So a lot of the discussions I hear, you know, happening about Somali art on social media is people are kind of tired of, you know, the same narrative where you have a lot of the younger generation, the diaspora, talking about, you know, the older tradition of Somali art, or what their parents used to enjoy in terms of, you know, whether that's music or whether that's poetry, or just the same kind of themes and narratives. So there seems to be, you know, kind of like this critique of young people co-opting older narratives and stories and experiences that they didn't necessarily experience themselves. And, you know, I don't think there's a problem with bringing in the old where necessary. And I think actually I would say the opposite. It's important to kind of like, you know, pay homage to how, you know, our forefathers and the older generation used to do Somali art, like the oral tradition and storytelling and how it used to be. But I definitely would agree that there needs to be room for new things to come about. So new art forms, new stories, much more nuanced experiences of Somalis in the diaspora. So that's the only time I think that there was anything close to kind of like a stigma or a taboo. It's kind of like, you know, there's this tension of old and new, basically.
Yeah. No, that was great. Thank you. Yasin or Najoum, do you guys want to add on to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't think there's a stigma as such. I feel like at this point in time, perhaps due to the 30 years of unrest in Somalia, the activity in the art world, purely from a Somali point of view, is sort of non-existent. So we're sort of constantly referring to videos of Hassan and Samatar or Khadra or the previous generation that used to have such a rich history of music and sort of theatre, that this generation doesn't necessarily have that same wealth of experience to draw from. So it's sort of up to us in a way, I guess, to bridge that gap and create you know, short stories, literature, music, poetry that connects those two generations together. And I think that's the issue, and the fact that we haven't been able to do so yet is probably what creates the vacuum for someone to go in and create it. So I don't think it's a stigma. I just think it's sort of non-existent, but I'm sure with the level of talent that I'm seeing around the world in Somali diaspora, I'm sure hopefully soon someone is going to bridge that gap.
Inshallah. Thank you, Yasin. So we're just going to move on to the next question, which is, why do our people not take Somali art seriously?
I guess I can answer that. So the problem, I guess, is because especially some parts of Somali culture last 30 years, people focused, you know, we were growing up, we were like, the whole country was in a mess where the fights and all this destruction happened. So the culture was the last thing that people
It might be
think
better
about.
if you take out your headphones because it's making a lot of scratchy noises.
Oh, sorry. I think the problem is people were in a, you know, in a messy situation in the country where the destruction, where the fight was going on. We were, you know, people were under survival situation. They were surviving. So art was the last thing that comes to their mind. So I think that was the problem. And because of the revolution and the change that came to the people in these 30 years, it changed people's mind about art. I believe some of them think that art is haram or it's a bad thing, and then they started, you know, we putting art aside because we think it's not important. But I believe visually and poetry, art is really important for the people to understand, especially Somalis. Our people, most of them, they don't read or write, so they need visuals to understand the message that we want to send to them.
Do you think some Somali parents might discourage the kids from going down the route of, you know, doing things to do with arts, and instead encourage them going down a profession of, you know, for instance, science or lawyer or something, you know, along that
Exactly.
line.
Somali parents actually, they don't like their children to go through art, because the art, they think if it comes to let's say being a filmmaker or storyteller or a painter or photographer, they think it's useless thing that they cannot earn through it, or they think it's maybe a haram thing where people image is bringing problems. That's what they believe. So they discourage their children to go through that way, even if they are good at this thing. From my experience, my parents never wanted to be an artist and a painter, and this is the choice I made after I grew up, so that I needed to be this, although they were not agreeing with me most of the time. So I understand that.
Can I just ask to the rest of you guys, did you find that you had the same thing with your parents? Were they for or against you going down this career path?
I can jump in on that if you want.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect in our culture, and maybe even other cultures, that sort of art and like the world of maths and, you know, becoming doctors and being really beneficiary to society. There seems to be a disconnect in there. But I mean, there is studies that show, like, if a child sort of attends music lessons or drama lessons, that they perform well in things like maths and physics and so on and so forth. And you see examples in that in kids when we turn on the TV and you got Baby Shark, you got A, B, C, D sort of singing out these things to them. So they do pick up by sort of engaging in certain art forms, and they learn that way as well. Art can obviously add on to that conversation. Art, I mean, great literature has been created, great speeches, great policies have been, you know, built on the back of inspirations from other artists. So that's just my two thoughts on that. They're not necessarily separate, but things do go together. So yeah, I guess a good example is sort of the Steve Jobs thing. The guys, and then, you know, he liked calligraphy and things like that, and then you get the iPhone, and sort of merge the two cultures into one.
No, that's great. Thank you, Yasin. Nisha, I wanted to ask you, because you talked about preserving Somali art and how, if I don't remember incorrectly, you had a conversation with a lady, I don't think you mentioned her name, but you spoke about the difficulty of preserving Somali art. Could you just...
Yeah, no, I didn't speak with her. I was reading her papers. She's an academic. Her name's Sada Maya, and she was speaking about how it's difficult for people to have an incentive to preserve cultural heritage or art if they don't see themselves reflected in it. And so I guess I think that's a really valid point, and I think that's why representation needs to be in the hands of Somali people, how they want to represent their country and what kind of art you choose to keep. And otherwise there is no incentive to preserve it, like, especially if a lot of it is colonial cultural heritage. Given the mindset that the colonizers have, it doesn't exactly depict Somali people very well most of the time. So why would you have an incentive to want to preserve that? So I guess that was what I was saying before.
Yeah.
That basically people need to take back the narrative, and then they'll have the incentive to preserve that art and heritage.
So I feel that's a very valid point, taking back the narrative, and few of you have already mentioned that. What I want to ask you is how, so Yasin said, you know, it's easy, it's now, you know, it's not as elite as it was before, and it's easier to become a filmmaker, and it's more accessible. But what steps can people take to take back the narrative? Do you guys think? Yeah, any of you can go ahead and answer that.
I think writing.
One point I just want to debate that. I don't think it's that easy to take back the narrative. As in, yeah, you can pick up a camera, but if you want to reach people, and you want to reach not just the people who are already with you, but you want to reach the people who aren't listening, it's really difficult, I think, still. and the power of who tells stories and what stories are shared with the wider audience, especially the non-Somali audience. It's hard to crack into, I think. And I guess more has to be done in that sense. And people who have that power need to be more willing to, you know, publish other people's work and find the space for it. But that's a bit pessimistic, sorry.
No, thank you for your opinion. Yasin, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of agree. I mean, by getting into it, I mean, it's easy to pick up a camera. Obviously, the distribution element. We don't necessarily have a sort of rich history when it comes to film. The moment that the Somali culture slowly started producing films is like 80s and mid 90s, and that's when the war kicked off. So there are a few film reels preserved, but I mean, what I'm talking about now is just being able to tell a story, or being able to convey an expression. I feel like there's many avenues to do that. I feel like there's so many talented people, writers, journalists, I mean, people that we know of that are engaged within our culture and slowly pushing that envelope forward. And there's just a quote that I remember when speaking about this narrative thing, is that I once read a guy said it was the narrative will always be controlled by the hunter until the lion learns how to write. So by taking back the narrative is just, you know, being able to publish our own stories, like what Salma is doing is great with the sort of work that he's doing on a novel. I'm sure everyone in this group has an element that they can add on to this society and sort of push that envelope further. So I think there's an onus on everyone to sort of do their bit to lift the culture as a whole. I do realize these sort of realities of, you know, we don't have agents, there's not a production house, there's not a distribution house either, but we do have YouTube and we do have Twitter and we do have Instagram, and these are avenues in which we can express our thoughts and sort of add to the wider conversation.
Let me just ask you another question about filmmaking. So, you know, those films that we see or series that we see where there's a Somali character, but it's not played by a Somali person and they're not getting, you know, the actual character correct. How do we go about challenging that, or, you know, having an impact on those kind of things?
I was gonna just jump in there.
Sure.
I would say, you know, I agree with what's already been said about how it's also about the means of production. So, like, you know, publishing houses needing to actually be aware of, you know, differences in society and being able to look out for more diverse works, including Somali narratives and experiences. And also what Yasin said about, you know, actually writing it down, archiving it, and finding more non-traditional ways of archiving. But there's also, I would say it's definitely very complex. It's not just that our stories are being denied or that they're not being given a space. So things like acting, actually, how many Somali aspiring actors do you know? Not that many. And even if of those are aspiring, how many of them actually gone to these drama schools where, you know, a lot of the time when it comes to film production companies, they look at particular schools and particular places to find new talent. So I would say there needs to be more professional, you know, like Somalis, if we do want to be taken more seriously, like the acting world, you know, and they are aspiring actors, then, you know, there's nothing wrong with seeking mentorship or, you know, going to a more traditional kind of like a part-time acting school or drama school or something like that. So at the same time, as well as challenging, you know, the idea of diversity in publishing or in the film world, we also need to think about, you know, breaking barriers and going the road less traveled, I suppose. If you are passionate about the arts, take up a much more traditional way of learning about it and enter the world in that kind of way. So yeah, it's a mix of both.
Great, thank you, Salma. Zahra, did you just put your hand up, or no? Okay. So I just wanted to ask, do you feel that Somali art has changed in the past decade, and if so, in what way?
If I might, I don't think there's much change. We still listen the same old music or whatever that's left of, do the same painting styles and so on. I think the reason is we didn't get the time to experiment and try new ideas. The whole art and music scene of Somalia was just growing when the civil war happened. So I don't believe this might change.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I believe there's been a little bit of a change, but Abdurrahman is absolutely right. There hasn't been the massive change, but there has definitely been a change from old school Qarami Somali music to what we're listening to now. I think from a music point of view, there's been a bit of a change there. But that's just due to the fact that people have changed as well. We know a lot of that diaspora they don't live in Somalia. They're in the UK, US, Canada, different beats. Arts is always evolving. It's just how we take it on ourselves and translate that into our own.
Thank you, Yasin. So the final question, can art influence the way we think? And can it change society's perspective? I think we're going to go around and just get everyone's answer to this. So we're going to start with Nisha.
100%. I think it can definitely change the way we think. I mean, if we're talking about this context specifically, you know, me learning about Somali art hugely changed my impression of the country, the people, made me a lot more informed about it. And I think that that's really one of the most powerful things about art and storytelling in all forms. It helps us have understanding and empathy and see things from other people's view and widen our perceptions. So 100%, yeah.
Thank you, Nisha. Abdurrahman?
I genuinely believe through art we can understand each other, see things differently, and through new perspectives. I think art makes people come together and exchange ideas. You make friends through art and resolve issues our communities have. You create and get busy creating, and that develops you as an artist and impacts the society and everyone who sees your work. So I genuinely believe that a lot can change if we focus on creating more art.
Do you think with Somali art we can also change some of the, or just art in general, do you think it can sometimes change a society's view or perspective of some strong ideas they have, or?
Yes, I think it's an easy way to tell people new ideas through art. It's not as difficult as educating people and sending kids to school, and it will make the whole taking the narrative easier, because I think an interesting example about the narrative topic is that if you Google now the word Mogadishu as in English, you only see images of destruction and blood and war and just terrible stuff. But if you Google the word in Somali, instead of Mogadishu, if you type Mogadishu, M-O-Q, you see new architects, you see paintings, you see new photography, you just see beautiful and inspiring stuff. So by creating art, I think a lot can change in Somalia in general.
Thank you, Abdurrahman. Yasin?
I definitely, I think the question was, does that have an impact on society? Was that right, Amina?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I definitely think it does. I mean, just go back to your school days and see how many songs influence style choices, how music impacted our lives. I think art connects people. It bridges the gap between two people. If you meet someone and you listen to the same sort of music, there's a higher probability that you're going to become friends throughout the year or throughout your life, really. So sometimes I think art creates connection points in between people. And I think that's primarily because it's an emotion. Art is expressing an emotion, hoping that the other person in the receiving end understands what it is that you're trying to tell them, whether it be as abstract as creating a painting, or whether it be as more direct as poetry or music or filmmaking. So I definitely do believe that it has an impact, and I do believe that it can change society for the better as well. It can also do the opposite. I mean, that's propaganda. That's the difference of art, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, do you know what I just remembered now? You said when you went back to like childhood and stuff like that. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like every generation has a Disney movie that they can relate to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's High School Musical for me. That's the one. I'm joking. It is.
I was gonna bring up The Lion King, but I think, I think just looking at my nieces and nephews, I think it's what's it called? Frozen. So yeah, thank you, Nisha. Frozen. And I just like visually, I just imagine having that, but like a Somali version and telling like a Somali story. And what I love with the Disney movies that I do like is there's like a hidden message that you understand, but also the child that's sitting next to you that's watching it understands it. So I find that, I don't know how that works, but they understand it without, there's not that many words in these movies, but there's like a lot of moving and dancing. Subliminal messages, yeah, that's right. So hopefully Yasin and the rest of the filmmakers out there and novelists out there can write some amazing stories for, Somalis, about Somalis. But Salma, let's go on to you next. How do you think it can influence society and people?
Yeah, no, definitely can influence society for better or for worse. Art, just like, I don't know, political discussions, it's just a medium of just cultural transmission. It's just another way of retelling history, creating new histories, etc. So yeah, it has the power to do that, and that's why it should be taken really seriously. And we should be thinking about, who's creating the art. Is it representative of our society? So one thing I was going to say, with even as Somalis, like, who is given that platform, are they representative of our communities? We have, the issue of qabil, which comes up a lot in politics and our culture, and I just don't think that we can talk about Somali art without addressing that as well. If we're looking at those who are given, platforms to travel the world and given all those grants and, the opportunity to exhibit their work in places like the British Museum or in museums around the world, what story are they telling about our people, and is it representative? Is it diverse? Does it include people at the margins? That's really important. So if we can envision an inclusive way of looking at our culture, then we're getting somewhere. Because I think a lot of the time as Somalis we talk about, we need to see ourselves represented, we need to see ourselves in mainstream museums and places like that, but there's still a hierarchy there where we're within ourselves excluding other people, and it's dishonest for us to kind of talk about the lack of representation for our history whilst we're erasing minorities within our country. So when we can figure that out internally, I think maybe we can talk about moving it to a mainstream place. So yeah.
No, Salma, that's some very important questions, and don't think we have the answers for them here today, but hopefully eventually someone can answer them and we can get over those hurdles. Zahra, we're going to move on to you next.
Yeah, I believe art has the ability to heal wounds. It has the ability to inspire. It has the ability to move a nation. It's limitless, so it could definitely, shape our society and impact the way we think and the way we act. It's an amazing thing, when people watch something and then they get inspired and they get to do more with that inspiration. For example, if they weren't, if they were looking for solutions for issues that they were facing, they can just look up to art and then maybe feel better or find something else to do. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Zahra. Najoum?
Yeah, I guess when it comes to influencing through art, it's really important, especially in our community, because we have a big number of people who does not speak, who does not read or write. So we need a strong visuals to send a message to them so that they understand what we want to tell them. When it comes to peace, when it comes to development, we can send that through image. So because images are very stronger than words, and like when you want to write 1,000 words, it's better to do one visual image so that the people who you want to be understood to understand what you want to say. Also, art is really international language. Everybody understands, especially when it comes to art, photography or paintings. When you draw something, everybody understands, no matter what language he speaks. You just tell them, this is what I want to show you. Like for example, now when I go to China and I don't speak Chinese, I'll just draw something and tell them, this is what I want to tell you. So visuals are very strong. They can send a beautiful message, and our Somali community, we are lacking of that. So we need to develop more visuals, more music and more art, so that people really appreciate how beautiful our country and our culture is.
Thank you, Najoum. Thank you. So we're just going to go on to see if we've gotten any questions. So we only have one question so far. I think it will mainly be for Yasin, but if any of you guys want to also answer this one. So it says, as a filmmaker, there has been a stigma towards our Somali film actresses. Do you, Yasin, what do you think? Do you think that's the case, or?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think maybe, I guess for a film, especially for Somali film, there is that, I think Najoum spoke about it earlier, there is that fear to a degree. I don't think it's a stigma. I think there's that fear that if you put a female on screen, especially in a Somali film, the representation of the writing has to be spot on. So you have to present her in a way that is respectable in our culture and also in our religion as well. So I think maybe that's what the question alludes to. I don't think we have that many films out in the society. I don't think there's that many Somali filmmakers to call it a stigma. I just think there's less people in that profession, primarily because there are those barriers that a female would have to jump over. Again, I mean, feel free to speak about it. I'm not a female, but you guys probably know more than me. So maybe there are barriers. Maybe there is a bit of hushmat or hishod that is sort of tied into that. But
Sorry. Yeah, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear it.
So this is from Mahad, and he says, as a filmmaker, there has been a stigma towards our Somali film actresses. So what I think he means by it, maybe it's, you know, there's different characteristics or certain things that a Somali female can't do than a Somali guy can do, and I think maybe there's the fear of like we're gonna get a lot of backlash if this, like Yasin said, if the female is not represented really like correctly.
I mean, I just to continue on that point as well. I mean, from the sort of theatre clips that I've seen and the IYADOO that I've seen in Somalia, I've always felt personally that the female character was portrayed very strongly. So, Khadradai and Maryam Mulsan, when you see those ladies on stage, they are like speaking with such, you know, veracity and power in their voice, and it's almost the man in that theatre show that's almost like hiding and saying, "Okay, I'll go home," or "I understand." So I mean, do you guys feel the same way? Do you see it, or do you feel like it's opposite?
I don't see it in those films, but I think maybe what's happened is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone thinks something else, but I think maybe our Somali society's perspective of how females should act in the theatre or in films have changed, and they've placed certain limits on them, and that's what's making them difficult. That's what's making it more difficult for actresses to really fulfill, you know, that character. Maybe.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, like Yasin said, when I look at like old snippets of like Somali theatre, or like the women there, it's very powerful. They, you know, they really come into their role, and they have a voice. But perhaps what has happened is maybe over time, people have kind of used religion to kind of misconstrue this idea that women should not be seen and should not be heard. So the idea of a woman being this a heroine in a film or something kind of goes against the idea of like women not being seen and heard. So yeah, there's definitely that tension there. But I'm not a filmmaker, so I'm not in the film world, but from the films that I have seen, the female characters, the Somali female characters, have always been very memorable, and they've been able to just portray the truth of their experiences without worrying about, you know, what people think of them. But maybe I haven't observed enough criticisms to know what those barriers look like at the moment.
So as this is a big, it seems like it's one of the main, a big barrier, you know, people may be fearing the backlash that, you know, people that see the film or whatever, the backlash they'll get from a religious perspective. How do we educate people in the sense of, you know, getting over that barrier? Or what do you think that can be done to kind of change people's mind about that?
I think it's life. I think art imitates life. I think at the end of the day, you know, of course there are things that aren't necessarily, you see things every day. You see things that are much more scary and much more realistic in your life every day. I feel like the representation of female in Somali films should be written with an element of truth, because what's happening is if reality goes one way and art goes the other way, is that you get this sort of pseudo art that has nothing to do with the reality in which we live in. If you listen to your mother, listen to your sister, and they tell you about the stories that are happening in society, you would always find strong female characters, and there's always an element of interaction between the male and the female, and so you can't cut that. You can't say these are two separate individuals living opposite sides of the world, because I mean life doesn't allow for that to happen. So I feel like I don't know, maybe I'm just babbling on, but I feel like there's a reality is almost it's much more scarier than art is, I feel like, and we hear the stories. I mean, first for our mothers, our daughters, sisters. I mean, you mentioned the topic the other week was it sexual abuse, you said.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a scary topic as well. But I mean, can you imagine displaying that on screen? We haven't reached to that stage yet. So let alone, you know, getting female actors involved in telling normal stories. When are we get to that? When are we going to go into that stage? When are we going to be able to tell
You
those
think
stories?
it's because Somalis are just uncomfortable with seeing reality and they just want it to be something that's, you know, happy, comfortable, nothing, you know, outside of the comfort zone. Comfort.
Can I say
Probably,
one thing?
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah,
go on it.
No, I think this is a dilemma for lots of cultures who aren't always represented in the mainstream. Say you have like, it's going to be the first Netflix show about Somali culture. There's going to be so much pressure to make sure that you make a representation that you're proud of to all these people who don't know about it. And I think that's why things get really difficult. You almost want to, every culture has got its problems and you don't want to present them straight away. So I think when it gets more normal and there's loads of shows that show things about the culture, it wouldn't be so hard to show the good and the bad about it, if that makes sense. And
so you mean it's about the first impression, basically?
I just think it's a bit of a curse in the situation when you are that minority and you're not represented in the mainstream, then you start wanting to sanitize what you put out because there's so much burden and everybody's going to look at that and what are they going to think. And I think it's a problem for loads of different minority cultures. And then when you add on how people are going to judge Somalis in general, how they're going to judge Somali women, what extra problem you've got, because around the world people are going to judge women more. You know, it's not just a Somali problem. So yeah.
That's very true. Thank you.
Amina, if I can just add on to that as well.
Yeah, go on.
As a member of the Somali Storytellers, we are a digital storytelling company. We also do filmmaking. This is one of the issues we also face, is that when you want to talk about the real issues that is happening in the community, say for instance like rape or like FGM, for instance, you don't see a lot of victims who want to come out to show their face because of the ebb culture. And I think something that we're all starting to realize recently, that there's a huge issue in our community where everything is labeled as ebb, especially when it comes to issues about women. Yeah, so like it's very hard for women to come out and actually speak out about the issues that they're facing because they fear the backlash that's going to happen. So what we tend to do is, like, as much as we try to produce content that shows the positive side of Somalia, we also try to highlight the issues, kind of making a balance to show people, hey, okay, these are issues. It's happening all over the world. It's not just unique for Somali people. But if we don't talk about it, then how can we, you know, make more positive content and, you know, create a positive atmosphere for our people? If we shine light on these issues, then we can change that and stop it from happening so that we can have more positive things to discuss.
Thank you, Zahra. We've gotten one more question and then we're just gonna go around and get everyone to give the final remarks. So this question is from Saeed, and he said, are we losing our Somali language, and how do we bring back the Somali language to the younger generation? So I think this is to do with more from the poetry aspect and mahma.
Okay, I'll step forward for that one since I do a lot of poetry. I think that there's always a space to learn Somali. I myself, I'm doing my best to learn the Somali language to make Somali poetry. I try to push myself sometimes and, you know, kind of like, even though, I mean, it's very hard, I don't want to come out publicly and start doing Somali poetry right now because I feel like I'm not at that level yet. But I do engage with Somali poets in Mogadishu, local poets that know the language. But it would help if we had like an institution that kind of like teaches, it teaches our people the language, the structure of the language, the importance of the words that we're supposed to use when we're doing poetry, or just the language in general. If we had something to, an institution basically that taught us how to, you know, structure our words better, then I think it would be a great thing, and that would kind of continue the Somali language and, you know, pass it on to the next generation. And I feel like as Somali diaspora, if we come back to the homeland, it's very easy to kind of catch on to the language. That's all I would like to add.
On the back of that question, let me just ask you a quick question as well. Do you feel like the language has kind of changed in the past couple of years, where more slang Somali is being used possibly?
Yeah, I agree. The language is changing. And I think that's like around the world too, like in every language. For instance, if we look at English, there's the Shakespearean era where people would speak a different type of English. And then it slowly evolved into the English that we're speaking now. So I think it's not just something for Somali people. It's something that's happening around the world, but people preserve these phases of their languages through their educational institutions. And we don't have that in Somalia. We had someone to preserve the original Somali language in the way that the people used to talk back in the days, and then now, and then, you know, like slowly how it changed, we can kind of understand what the original language looks like and how it has changed today. There is a lot of slang right now, and it's spoken even here in the capital city. You see people referring to the language in different ways. So I do agree with that. It is changing, but I think the change is happening all over the world. It's not just for Somalia, but we definitely do need educational institutions that do preserve our language, just in case people want to reflect back and understand how it looked like before.
Thank you, Sarah. That was perfect. But Yasin, did you want to say something? You've just unmuted yourself.
Yeah, sure. I feel like there's a strong correlation between the amount of art that a country produces and how strong that population is with regards to speaking the language, and how strong the diaspora is as well. A few examples of that is, in my family, my sister, for example, started listening to Somali music early on, and just by default, her language got better and better and better and better and better, even though she's never been to Somalia at that point in time. So I feel like with the amount of art that is poured out into society, you do create these language skills that are being developed by people who have never visited Somalia, never been there, and can speak it fluently, and can even do mahmaya and gabay and a few other things. So I feel like there's definitely a strong correlation. I mean, Hollywood, you know, it's been Hollywood movies for the past, you know, how many years, and there's so many people around the world that speak English. I know people that speak Hindi just based on watching Bollywood.
Yeah, true.
So there is a correlation between the amount of art that a country produces and the sort of language skills that are being built as well in the meantime.
Thank you for that, Yasin. If no one else has anything else to add, we're just going to go around so you guys can give your final remarks. So we're going to start with Nisha, you're first to go.
Good to unmute myself. Just want to say massive thanks for having me in this discussion. It's been really great. Real privilege to be included. There was not really a closing remark, but it just popped in my head and thought I would share it. But I remember in the same paper I was talking about before, by Sadamaya, she made a really interesting point that some cultures, when they want to preserve their identity or whatever, they build big buildings and they put artifacts from back in the day, and they look at them and everybody sits and they read about what they used to do, and they think that is preserving heritage, when actually her point was, in Somalia they'll be more likely to not put it in a big building and look at it, but they know how to make it and they still know how to work it. And actually knowing how to reproduce the machine and understanding what it does is the cultural heritage. It's not keeping it in a room. I don't know if that made any sense, but I thought it was something that made a lasting impression to me, so I thought I would share it with you. But yeah, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Nisha. A.rahman?
Thank you, Amina. I want to give a huge shout out to you and to Mahmoud, who invited me to this program. And I think we should all focus on creating art and changing the narrative of Somalia. I think there is an effort by the current administration right now to preserve and restore basic and important monuments and platforms like the National Theatre and the museum, the National Museum. And it's a good start, and I hope if we continue on this path, we will hopefully get to be a creative hub for Africa, and the golden age of Somalia will be back. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, A.rahman. Yasin?
I'll unmute myself. Yeah, I second what everyone else has said, and thank you so much for having me on. I mean, I really appreciate it. For creating a forum to have these discussions, I think it's important that we sort of create stories and create films and create poetry that help our generation and the generation after us to have a connection to our culture. I think is really important. And I also think it's important that we share these things as well. One of the main things that I spoke about with my wife was, you know, where's the Somali language going to be in 20 years' time for people living outside Somalia? If it's not going to be easy to visit the country every now and again, where is the language going to be? And that is only going to be aided by the amount of art that we produce as a culture, and the amount of stories that we create, and the amount of novels that we write, and the amount of poetry that we do, the amount of music that's created. So yeah, thank you for creating forums like this to have these discussions, and hopefully we can take away some benefit and motivate us to continue our journeys.
Thank you, Yasin. That's a very interesting question. Where will the Somali language be in 20 years? We'll have to wait and see if we're alive that day, inshallah. Salma?
My closing remarks would be just, you know, thank you for inviting me onto this platform to, you know, discuss something that I'm quite passionate about. And also I would just encourage anyone listening at home on the Facebook to, you know, continue to create art, even if it defies, I guess, what the mainstream think of as art. So keep writing, you know, filming, drawing, painting, whatever it is that you like to do, and just share your experience when you feel like it. Yeah, that's all.
Salma, for those that are watching that are interested in, you know, getting a copy of your novel, inshallah, when it's out, how can they just make sure they're aware of it when it...
I would say maybe the best thing is to follow Literary Natives. So we're on Instagram, also on Twitter, and just kind of, that's where I kind of share my literary stuff. So that's a platform for all writers of color around the world. But I guess when the time is right about my novel, I'd share the details there. So yeah.
Thank you, Salma. Next, we're going to go to Najoum.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this group. I hope you're hearing me well. And it's really amazing that I see all these beautiful faces and new creative people. Like I know Zahra and I know Prince Mohammed, and really amazing to meet you too, guys. And I'm sure we are the creatives. We are the people who are really here for our community. And, you know, we have to do a lot about how to create the change that we need to see through our artworks, or through our videos and poets. So let's keep inspiring other people who really want to change the narrative and to create beautiful Somalia. And we are really glad that we find the theater, the museum back. And I hope the young people will be more creative and will show the positive side of our country. And I'm so happy to be invited in this group and see all these beautiful faces. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Najoum. And finally, we have Zahra.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you for having me. And I also want to thank Mohammed for inviting me to join this discussion as well. It's really opened my eyes to different discussions that we've had, and the people here are all very talented. There's still hope for our art, Somali art, and I think we still have a bright future. We are the future generation, and it's up to us to make sure that we don't lose our Somali art and heritage. With that being said, I also want to say hi to Najoum and Cyprus. We all stay here in Mogadishu together, and I believe we can work together to produce more content here from the motherland, inshallah. And just thank you guys. Thank you all.
Thank you, Zahra. I just want to also say to all our viewers, Nisha, you have a website link that you gave me that I'm going to share with viewers so they can see the Somali artwork, that project that you took part of. Abdurrahman will be sharing Abdurrahman's Instagram account where you can go and follow him and see the photography he's done. And we'll also share Yasin's Instagram account so you can see the things that he's doing. And also, Zahra, you said, was it the
SomaliStoryTellers, and I also do poetry, but I'm the CEO of the SomaliStoryTellers, which is a filmmaking company, digital storytelling. We put a lot of videos on our Instagram as well.
Okay, great. So, and if you have any other links or websites that you want us to share along with this video, please just send it to us and we'll make it accessible to all our viewers. And I just want to say thank you all for agreeing to come today and give us, you know, an hour of your Saturday. It's much appreciated. So thank you for that. And then thank you to the entire Wada Xaajood team. You don't see them here, but there's a group of us putting all of this together. So thank you to all of them. And yeah, have a great Saturday evening. And take care. Bye, guys.
Bye.